What would give a man the incentive to put down his distractions? Would it be the pressure of internal thought, or the gut-wrenching revulsion and interest that viewing the void from the precipice edge would buff him with? What is the spark that ignites ruthless introspection? It's as though trauma fractures the ego enough for consciousness of a kind to escape, to be freed just enough to see itself from perspective at the risk of falling and atomizing into black insanity. Perhaps this is the myth of the phoenix combined with the myth of Medusa. Obtain perspective on your demons and become reborn in the slaying. The struggle to repeat the cycle is to concentrate the essence of you, striving to explore, define, and inhabit your potential. The topic of death is an important one for me. It shaped my life not just in the usual way where the border of life and death define both domains, but also by seeing and experiencing the deaths of others. I've always had the utmost respect for one's death, the solemn final act of their lives, the drop of water reforming into the sea, the cycle of our planet, with force or with grace, I, a witness. I did not see much value in looking at death from a griever's perspective because it focuses on the griever's loss rather than placing what is, in my view, the correct significance on the individual to whom the death belongs or the act itself. A young frame through which I viewed the room of one dying. What was youth turned to frailty 60 years too early. What was rock turned to dust. What was blind be forced immediate, overwhelmingly bright perspective. This is the burning of the phoenix. How strange that not all phoenix forms survive the transmutation of fire. Something so tragic as one dying young is sad enough without the throngs of crying heads whose tears drown what could be redeemed or recovered from such an event. Why can't we let go? Why can't even the faithful let go? Is there some confession in their time in this crucible? The perspective that can be obtained is great and freeing if one is brave enough to experience it. Empathy is a tool. It causes great healing and harm to the ego. The sole focus on one's umbilical connection and complexion is a life blind to pitfalls. When the ego resists reformation provided through the correction of the honest and accurate potter, there are grounds for concern. So much can be built on this unsettling falsity that after a time it is quite impossible for a caliber of person to change even a simple yet incorrect point in their worldview. They prefer the work of imposing their false reality on others. They distract or admonish themselves when dark thoughts come forth from what is believed to be the static, rather than from the underdeveloped fetus enveloped in lightning. The claim is also made that these dark thoughts are a dark lord's imperative whisper. They hide from the gluttonous hooded singularity, either in their grief or by forming their horizon such that from within, death and most of life is invisible. I am uncertain if it is death or life that these fear the most. We are all going to die, drawn towards it by a grip and pull so tight that we wither in our hopeless struggle. Through deed and blood we find our emancipation. Seeing the freedom and efficacy of a life devoid of fear or faith as a response to this understanding prompts me to follow suit. Who among us would volunteer to fulfill our reservation in Dante's Inferno, or even admit that we made that reservation ourselves? We imagine things that are not present and project our values onto others who do not exhibit them. Heartbreak to the brave, a platonic cave to the cowardly. These illusory virtues are earth and water to the believer, and are a great coward in the glamour of our greatest hero. In our time of refined understanding and knowledge, those whom this function still serves are naturally undermined. It is a dangerous state when the undermined are also mined for the finance that has become the lifeblood of the refiners of knowledge. In times of acute truth, false reality crumbles, and as it falls, the false will act in kind and drown those trying to save them from drowning, just to have one more breath of falsity before their doom is delivered unto them by their murderous ignorance, fear, and faith. The account of those on the white ship is very interesting as a view on the spectrum of the human response to death. What can inspire fear or faith in us? The call of the void, the truth that pain belongs to the living, death, the duality of us? It appears in all cultures and all ages, even as a living thing. It is as common an aspect of humanity as eyes are to a face, and it can form a value of life best associated with disaster and rivers of blood. It is because of this consequence that it is worth investigating. I have no way of knowing how the first animal became aware of its mortality, although I do enjoy thinking about it. I am also blind to how it dealt with that realization, but as I can know my own mortal status and the implications thereof and move to deal with them, I can empathize with those who share this ability or characteristic, whatever the evolutionary distance between them and algae. I ask, to what level of abstraction do we need to go to deal with this sufficiently to grasp the final emancipation? And also, who among us are capable of achieving it? We are four-dimensional beings robbed of the fourth dimension, in a chaotic state, unable to mature into our complete adult form without potluck trauma. The wisdom of men was lost with the wisdom of Odin. The beauty and simplicity of humanity was lost with Ethan. It was replaced by the vanity of desert cults, an abstraction too far. For the longest time, we have been constructing lies to help us deal with our finality. In my opinion, it was easier to put this question aside to get us to procreation without so much trauma and paralysis as would inevitably hinder that aim if we applied cause and effect to our own lives in too extensive an effort. We built huge hierarchies on this, in fact, so powerful that they have controlled and do control the lives of billions and have seen many to their end and many more from their beginning. Seemingly, all this institutional bloodletting is a result of our unwillingness to accept the implication of death's question, and in particular, any other philosophy to it besides our own. I wonder how some go gracefully to death, how some rebel until the wet fingers snuff out their flame, how some rush to it with the purpose of passing through into the unknowable to escape what is thought to be known, like running through a mirror expecting to enter the reflection only for the illusion to shatter as the truth hits the bottom of your stomach. What is it that makes this difference? The graceful death to me is associated with nobility, in the true sense of the word, satisfied accomplishment, wisdom in the continuum of an argument, perfect complacency at a task completed, or ignorance, the philosopher king's death or a fool's. There is surely an appropriate time for it. This sense of calm when faced with true and certain death would be a great tool to walk to the very boundary of life without unease and with wide-opened eyes to absorb the very last light. The ability to embrace those deserving and cherished, and strike down those equally deserving and despised. Judgment and justice, according to truth, a bias. The peace of spirit that might exist in a person who has both accepted their mortality and achieved their goals in spite of it, is an emancipated state worthy of envy. We can prepare for our death, the one we expect and desire of anyway, whether it be delivered gently to one old as he sleeps, or as an accepted risk in a directed action for fame, glory, or honor. We can heal the trauma that the existential question implies, but with some difficulty. It is not so easy to be calm and contemplate non-existence, or imagine what your final moments would be and what satisfied thoughts or apprehensions would form them. To live in the limits of a lie for fear of truth is unthinkable. For this life, and your ability to escape nothingness by your rippled existence in the minds of the living, for even one generation after you have gone, is all. It has come at a great cost to allow thought and speech contrary to the ecclesiastical in public. But it was not always this way, and it looks like it will no longer be this way. Yet, some cultures accepted the certainty of life and death, reality and nature, and gave it suitable position in society. Although history refers to these as barbarous, I wonder for the truth. How much can death be thought about before it becomes as malignant as those beliefs that refuse to acknowledge it? I live with my shadow throwing nooses around every branch I pass, as if to rip out my skeleton and grant it freedom from my control, just as I wish to escape the pill of the void. I am often prompted to action by this valuable companion's perspective. This black dog is my truest friend, always there, always grounding me, and always forcing evaluation. If I could entertain the ridiculous for a moment and consider my choice if I was given one between being born and nothingness, I would remain ethereal. This is not due to any hatred of life, but rather the context in which my life finds itself. I see that suffering and joy, and all the heavens and their pleasures, and all the hells and their tortures, and all the tales written or otherwise belong to the domain of the living. I choose in spite of this to act, to bring about such a world that, contemplating that previous question at the end of my life, would result in my choosing of birth. Grasping the significance of life to human eyes and seeing how it, with harsh causality, gets stolen from the young, puts my own life into perspective. It is with merciful fate and the acknowledgement of life's significance that I would meet doom on my own terms. The maturity of our final form must be achieved and exalted. The idea that empathy leads to degeneracy and isolation from the continuum is based on a misunderstanding of the meaning of empathy and also confuses that which is being and should be empathized with. It is not the individual that we should take the perspective of, but the stream of causality that within all individuals must flow. This is a painful experience that accompanies the knowledge of how lost to us the greater mass of the dead are in discrete terms. Those dead whose works we interact with stand in stark contrast against those who lived and died and gave us nothing to understand them by. Surely a slaying of nihilism and apathy in the passing. All this can be quite traumatic to think about. Terribly so, given a kind of mind capable of high-resolution empathy, one open to the subjectivity that emotions can flesh out. It is important to not only accept that the shadow cloud exists as a part of our whole, but also to maintain control of it. The choosing to view only light by casting out the dark is both impossible and foolish. The dark cannot be cast out any more than the desire for light can be extinguished perfectly. It is only the blinding of half of your being, and what benefit lives within that half. You cannot defend against evil adequately without empathizing with it, and this is the bravery of wise men. This ability we have to exhibit what could be described as the power to completely craft a reality within us. This ability to project it onto the world, overlooking infinite contradictions and crafting infinite justifications for them, done by simply convincing or coercing another to support one's view. This ability is the source of our anguish. There are many weak of mind or weak of constitution among us. Their mutual support of each other is the fabric that the wastes of humanity are built from. They harbor each other to create a schism in the dialectic from which they can source the imaginary ground to stand on in the face of the highest resolution, investigation, and interrogation of reality ever in history. They are buttressed by constantly increasing the territory of the taboo, for a lived life is the destruction of one imagined. Do not accept their bribes to appease your ego. Be at peace with what limits you can find and prove. Search for alternative avenues to develop your excellence. Do not live through the dreams of what could be for fear or failure, or faith in the pseudo-impossibility of the achieving of dreams. Have desire, but temper it with perspective and responsibility. We preach the virtue of honesty to others out of one corner of our mouths, while building upon a lie's foundation in the discussion with ourselves out of the other. It is so easy to fall into the abyss of providing therapy to all but ourselves. The first principle is the brutal honesty with ourselves, so that no too big to fail worldviews can be built upon lies. What is said about cold iron and its ability to form reality from vision through blood or threat thereof can be said about those who work with self-honesty and a valid mechanism to pass this existence. There is no denying the traction of those working according to the dictates of natural law. No faith has saved us a drop of blood. No lies have provided us a shred of truth. No fear has vanquished a single evil, while all have served for the opposite of what they claim. This blight of lies and pandering to the lesser self was not prevented by goodwill, tolerance, or faith. Returning to faith as an answer to these ills will do nothing to prevent them occurring again. Death and life is nothing compared to the idea of them that we have created, and these monstrous ideas limit lives well before death takes them. I imagine a civilization one in the form of a lighthouse, built to stand against all waves that crash upon it, one that serves in dark times, and one that is busy at maintenance in light, knowing the boundaries of peril that exists around it, and by its existence defining that very peril for all others to see, all the while protecting those that live and work within it. Imagine the cost to those young, unable to navigate in a busy, ruthless, and dangerous sea, when those who have been previously granted shelter in our house from the tumultuous ocean work to turn off that light, for fear, jealousy, hatred, and with a bullet to gratitude. Sometimes the things that ignorance hides in its shade are terrifically grotesque, and its revealing can inspire resentment in those living in the domain of fear. Perhaps in another time, another lighthouse will be built, and its enemies denied a Trojan entry. Perhaps the cancer that is eating at this one will be banished, excised, and cured from one in another time. This chance is no promise. There is no natural law to guarantee it. As we who build lighthouses of ourselves stand, we must do all we can to restore our greater light to its perfect condition. And we must do this while knowing the nature of the dark, without fear of its implication, faith in the longevity of good times, or any projection of virtue.